This is a Pulp archive recording. All public Pulp archive recordings are licensed under Creative Commons. For more information or to support us, please visit patreon.com/pulparchive. This episode was prepared by Saul and narrated by Tucker, the digital narrator. Dawg Eat Dawg by Houston Irvine. Wild West, Weekly, September, 1929. This episode contains period-typical depictions of crime, violence, and mild profanity. Listener discretion is advised. Lucius Carey, the shootin' fool, popped into the jail office, his face beaming. "Good morning, Sheriff and Hank," he greeted. "Any excitement on tap today?" Some men, Alcorn and Hank Rogers, for instance, could wear guns without the weapons seeming obvious. With Lucius, the opposite was the case. Instead of his .45's S appearing natural, they were carried with the same theatricalism with which the young deputy wore his cowboy clothes. He hitched his holsters forward on his hips in a grandiose gesture and strutted across the room. Alcorn frowned. He stroked the sparse red hairs fringing his bald pate, as was his habit when thinking deeply or upset. Lucius's simple showiness frequently bothered the sheriff, but that morning he had more important reasons to be worried. The shootin' fool felt the chill of the reception and set himself for a scolding. Alcorn never exactly bawled Lucius out, but rather chided, as a father might a child. With only a grunted, "Howdy, Lucius," the sheriff turned in his swivel chair back to look over some papers on his desk. Lucius looked at Hank. The veteran deputy was studious, teetering back and forth on the hind legs of a straight chair and preening his drooping black mustache. At intervals, Hank's jaws clamped and opened over a chew of tobacco. "Howdy, Lucius," the older deputy drawlingly repeated the sheriff's terse greeting, and that was all the attention the shootin' fool got from either of his friends for the time being. A little bewildered, he strolled across the room and perched on the edge of a table that far away. He hoped that he would not be noticed if anything was wrong. Alcorn laid down a letter which he had to reread at least 6 times. "It ain't no use," he directed his words at Hank rather than Lucius. "The Cattlemen's Association is crazy if they think we could do anything about that nest of rustlers. Why don't they send down some of their own smart special detectives to catch Sleepy Smith fur, as we know Sleepy ain't raiding none of this county. His headquarters is across the line in Sheriff Johnson's territory. We'd have a lot of explaining to do if we was to go over there and help ourselves to Johnson's crooks." "Why don't the association get after Johnson to clean Sleepy out?" demanded Hank. "Johnson's handicapped by not having no deputies worth a hang," Alcorn returned. "If Johnson was to ask me to help him, I'd be willing to go over and tackle Sleepy." "Johnson won't do that," the veteran deputy retorted. "Johnson's 1-0. Those guys won't never admit a proposition's too big for him to handle alone." Lucius stirred, feeling of his guns. He didn't just know what his friends were talking about, but the word rustler was a magic one to him. "Meanwhile," puzzled Alcorn, "what am I going to do about this letter?" "Far as I can see, there ain't nothing to be did," Hank replied gravely. "If we could just go a-shootin', I reckon we might do something about Sleepy." The sheriff sighed and picked up the letter again. One paragraph in particular disturbed him. "This association demands the cooperation of every peace officer, our own operatives being unavailable for your section at the present time. This association demands immediate steps by you for the extermination and capture of the notorious outlaw and rustler, Sleepy Smith." That was the heart of the letter, except for a hint that Alcorn or one of his aides might first worm his way into the gang. The sheriff was able to read a threat between the lines, however, a powerful organization for protection of cattlemen. The association likewise wielded a political club. It behooved sheriffs looking toward re-election to cooperate to the fullest extent with the association. "Bah," Alcorn growled. "I wish the feller what sat up in the association's office and wrote that letter had to figure out what I am to do. He might at least and seen that the country Sleepy hangs at it ain't in my county. Since we can't go shooting, maybe one of us can do some detecting, like the letter says. Johnson oughtn't to get sore if we just simply gets the lowdown on Sleepy's gang in where they got the cattle hid," Hank suggested. The sheriff grasped at the idea for an instant, then his face clouded again. "That thought ain't so good," he declared. "Me or you would have a fine chance working into Sleepy's outfit, wouldn't we? Every crook in 1,000 miles knows what we looks like. Sleepy would spot us the minute he's seen us." "Maybe one of us could disguise," Hank said, but not very enthusiastically. "Sleepy Smith's too smart to fall for anything like that," replied Alcorn to Lucius. The words of the older officer still formed more or less of a puzzle, but they excited him because they sounded like action. It must be a pretty complex problem, too, if neither the sheriff nor Hank could figure what to do about it. His face flushing, the shooting fool climbed off his table and went over to Alcorn's desk. Let me try it, Sheriff," the youth said, taking off his big hat and running his fingers embarrassedly through his yellow hair. "Try what?" Alcorn asked, staring up in surprise from the letter. I don't know what," the shooting fool stammered. "Whatever you and Hank were talking about, catching that Sleepy Smith rustling person. I want to try it." Intense desire for the job was written all over the young deputy's clean features. Hank and the sheriff looked at each other. Then Alcorn let Lucius read the letter. "I'll get my horse right now. Can I borrow a box of cartridges from you, Hank?" the youth said as quick as he had finished reading. "Hold on, Lucius." Alcorn started from his chair. "I ain't said you could go no place." The sheriff well knew the danger that the young deputy would face if he went on the mission. While Lucius seemed to thrive on danger, it was not Alcorn's way to send him into it if he could help doing so. Still, in this case, the only hope lay in sending Lucius. The sheriff looked long at the letter, and at the young man. He about decided to tell the Cattlemen's Association to take care of its own rustlers. "Oh, let me go," Lucius begged. "There won't be any danger except the kind I've been in before. I've always been able to get out all right." The last was said with an accompanying pat of his holsters. True enough, the deputy had shot his way out of any number of tight situations. His title of the shooting fool, at first given him because people thought he couldn't shoot, had become a symbol of success. Exceedingly ambitious Lucius' impetuous nature still sometimes made him seem pretty simple. "I'll let you go," Sheriff Alcorn decided. "But you got to promise one thing, Lucius." "What's that?" demanded the youth. "You got to give your word not to try to capture Sleepy nor none of his men. Your job is just to get into the gang and find out the facts about it. When you knows all you think you needs to know, come back and tell it to Hank and me. We'll decide what's to be did then," the sheriff said. "That's all right," the shooting fool returned. "I promise, except—" "Your promise means you ain't to do no shooting. Less'n you gets in a tight corner where you absolutely got to save your own life," warned Alcorn. Lucius' face took on an unwanted expression of seriousness. "All right," he sighed. "I won't shoot unless I have to." 2. Sleepy Smith's hangout was almost due west of Cotulla. Lucius was able to follow a road only a short way from town. Then he struck out in as straight a direction as possible through the prickly pear country. The rustler's lair, of course, was not advertised as such. Sleepy Smith owned a big ranch, which men who valued their lives usually kept away from. Everyone was certain that Sleepy stole cattle, but none had ever proved it. Lucius had no definite plan in mind. He only knew that in some way he must gain the confidence of the rustlers and become supposedly a member of the gang. He did not stop to consider that a rustler was supposed to know quite a lot about cattle. His clothing was the only thing about the shooting fool that resembled a cowboy, and it is doubtful if any self-respecting waddy would have been seen wearing them. It was cooler than usual in the great thicket, so that Lucius' horse was able to go along at a steady, brisk pace. Although there were no roads through the dense jungle of broad-jointed pear and mesquite, the deputy could guide himself through game and cattle trails. It was a lonely journey with only the sun above for company. Diplomacy, that's what Alcorn meant. I had to use the young man's side, looking ruefully down at the holsters on his hips. Sheriff said I mustn't use my guns. Said I had to be a diplomat to get into the gang and keep on being one to get out. Oh well, I guess I won't throw my guns away yet for a while. There's no knowing how soon I'll need them." Lucius rode and rode and rode. His directions for reaching Sleepy Smith's place were hazy. Along about the middle of the afternoon, he began to worry. "Wonder if I could recognize the place if I came to it. From what the sheriff and Hank knew about it, the ranch I am looking for shouldn't be this far out. I bet I passed it." He drew rein and paused there in the pear, looking around him. Only the same endless jungle through which he had been passing for hours surrounded him. "I've got half a notion we ought to go back, maybe circle around some, looking for the ranch buildings," he told his horse. He turned his horse and took a long glance at the sun to fix the directions firmly in his mind. He was starting to touch his spurs lightly to the animal's sides when a rider plunged out of a thicket a few yards away. Diplomacy or not, Lucius' first thought was to go for his guns a few inches away from his holsters. His hands halted as he realized that the stranger already had a revolver out. The shooting fool's hand shot skyward. "Ah, ah," the other man bellowed. "You decided not to go for your guns, huh?" Lucius crimsoned. It was bad enough to be held up without being insulted about it too, staring down the barrel of a revolver. However, he knew better than to attempt argument. The other, who the deputy decided might be either a freelance bandit or one of Sleepy Smith's gang, approached and started to disarm his victim. Jerking one of Lucius' guns from its holster, the stranger grunted in surprise. The young officer had been very careful to carve a notch for every man he had killed in the cause of law and order. There were a number of the telltale. Little nicks on the handle of the weapon that the holdup snatched. The stranger's demeanor suddenly changed from a sort of bored amusement to unfeigned respect. His own weapons bore few notches, and none had been acquired in fair and square fights. "Gosh," he muttered, "have you killed all them men?" Lucius was quick to recognize the possibility of any advantage. "Sure," he replied indifferently. "Those notches are for only part of my victims. If I cut them all on, I couldn't have any gun handle left." The outlaw did not know how much to believe. It was plain that he did not recognize Lucius as a deputy. The notches on the gun could scarcely be questioned, however. Men in that country did not usually lay claim to killings they had not done. "Gosh," the holdup grunted his pet word again. "You sure must be a tough hombre. I noticed you was pretty fast when you started to draw a minute ago. Plenty smart, too, you was. Hissed in your mitts when you seen I had the drap on you. What part of the country you from?" The shooting fool could, perhaps, have given the names of 100 towns of which he had heard, but where he had never been. There were plenty of tough spots along the border whence a gunman could plausibly come. However, seeking to settle an appearance of guilt upon himself, he chose what turned out to be a better answer. "Do you suppose I'd tell you where I am from?" he demanded. "You better." The other inspected the notched gun again. "I won't," retorted Lucius. Then grinning, he asked nervously, "You aren't going to turn me over to the law, are you?" The holdup looked quickly into the youth's eyes. "So that's it," he smiled darkly. "Well, you ain't a killin', huh? You still ain't ready to tell what town you shot the feller in?" "No, I won't tell." Lucius dropped his eyes. The other pulled out a plug of tobacco and sank big yellow teeth into it. He chewed in silence for several minutes. The deputy's nervousness, which had been pretended, began to be real. It appeared that his life hung in the balance of the other's thought. The outlaw spat and pronounced judgment. "Boss, I reckon it don't matter much whether you tells or not, just so long as you ain't lying about being a fugitive." Sleepy Smith had gained his moniker because of his general appearance of laziness. However, the eyes scrutinizing Lucius were far from sleepy. The deputy colored and fidgeted nervously in his saddle. "Why doesn't it matter?" he asked. "Just so long as I am not lying. What's the difference where you killed your man?" The outlaw quickly changed from a bearing of distrust to one of confidence. "I am Sleepy Smith," he went on with a grin. "Some folks says I am a rustler and a hoss thief and so forth. Are you?" asked Lucius. "Maybe so, and maybe not," retorted Sleepy. "There ain't never been no hombre made what is smart enough to catch me. Does you want a job, young feller? A job? The shooting fool's fears began to lessen. A job doing what? What you reckon? Laughed the rustler. Ain't there allus jobs for a gunslinger like ye in an outfit like mine? Lucius nodded, biting his lips to restrain a smile of exultation. I'd like to take the job, he declared. You're on, feller, Sleepy replied. By the time you gets through working for me, you'll have to buy a whole new set o' handles for your guns. Are you expecting trouble? The deputy asked, startled. Expecting nothing, the rustler roared with laughter. Why, young feller, I am actually waiting for it. You'll get plenty action with them guns if you sticks along with Sleepy Smith. 3 in the role of a gang gunman, Lucius accompanied the rustler chief to headquarters. Sleepy spoke little more except to drop a vague hint that he had been out looking over some stolen stock in explanation of why he was riding alone through the pair at that time of day. The shooting fool with both of his guns restored to his sides was all eyes at that. There was nothing unusual to see, just the everyday scene of thorny wilderness until they reached the buildings. These, nestled in a depression, seemed suddenly to leap out of the maze of thicket. The deputy realized that he probably could never have found the place without being guided to it or having explicit directions how to get there. There was no ranch house as such, but the long, low adobe bunkhouse could accommodate a score of men. At one end of the adobe was a rough board cook shanty, and the Mexican cook was squatting in the doorway stirring something in a big pan. There was a small barn inside a fence. Another small building behind the bunkhouse was probably used for storing various supplies. At the sound of the rider's approach, a man with a rifle in his hand came to the door of the bunkhouse. Another man stepped from around the corner of the barn. "Hello," Sleepy said. "Why you hear us coming, for we rid right up to the house." "You men on guard order have a gun covering a feller, for he gets this close." The guards did not reply, but scowled blackly at the speaker. "Your ears got to be stronger than that, son." The leader turned to his new follower. Sleepy's regular gangsters caught the broad hint and eyed Lucius jealously. "What you mean?" "He's got to have stronger ears," demanded one of them sullenly. "You ain't going to put that young greenhorn in this job, are you, Sleepy?" "That's just what I am a-going to do, Milt Larkin," the chief returned. "You been dozen here so long, you're worse'n no guard, purty nigh. I've been looking for a real gunman ter take your place, and I've found him. You're going back out ter nursing cows and riding in the sun like any other waddy." Milt scowled at the deputy with open contempt. "Think that fella can guard anything," he snorted. "He ain't much more'n a kid, sure," Sleepy replied. "A keen young feller's the best. He's a gunman." "He is now, Milt. Go out and catch you a hoss if you still has the ability to sling a rope. You'll find the rest of the boys moving the critters from the sink over to the North Fork of Lizard Creek." Milt looked murderously at his chief and at Lucius, but he knew better than to start trouble. Sulking, the replaced guard turned away. "Now you better step more lively when you hear somebody coming, or you'll get the same cure," Sleepy told the other watchman. "El Paso Pate, this here young feller who'll help you guard is—" The outlaw paused and looked questioningly at the shooting fool. "Carey," the deputy almost started to reply before he realized that his own name would not do. He mumbled, trying to think of a plausible alias. Nervously, he pushed back his big hat so that his yellow hair was exposed. Red with embarrassment, he looked more youthful and harmless than usual. "Ha ha," Sleepy guffawed. "You didn't think I knowed who you was when I fust met you, did you?" "No, did you?" Lucius managed to gasp. "Sure." "You're the Del Rio kid," the rustler retorted. "I ain't never seen you, but I heard you describe so's I'd know you in a million miles." The shooting fool breathed a deep sigh of relief. He had never heard of the Del Rio kid, but here was a name already assigned to him. The Del Rio kid must be some tough hombre too, for Sleepy spoke with obvious respect in his tone. El Paso Pate muttered something about glad to meet yer, although his manner did not bear it out. Like Milt, he seemed to be resentful of the young man's coming, trembling lest he be called upon some day to shoot down an innocent person or else be found out. Lucius was instructed regarding his new duties. These consisted solely of remaining watchfully at the ranch while the rustlers were away for company. He still had El Paso Pete, but the latter made few overtures of friendship. The deputy knew that he had one deadly enemy in the man whose job he had taken, and the spirit of the entire camp seemed to be resentful toward him. Was sleepy, however, as the hot days dragged on, he sat ace high. Fortunately, there were few visitors to that country, and it was more than a week before the shooting fool was called upon to show his ability as a guard. Then it was not a stranger, but one of the gang whom Lucius let slip up without giving an alarm. Milt Larkin and the boss happened to be near the house and saw the whole thing. Your ears ain't so pert neither, the deposed guard sneered blackly as he walked up with Sleepy. The deputy said nothing, and the rustler chief appeared puzzled what to do. What you going to do about it, Sleepy? Milt demanded. You see, ain't as good as guardin' as what I was. Sleepy shook his head and stared reproachfully at the youth who had fallen down on his job. Want me to plug him? The former watchman asked. The chief started. Plug nothing, he bellowed. I never plugged you when you went to sleep on the job, did I? No, but this feller is different, Milt declared malevolently. You knowed I was a good man 99 times out of 100. This here kid ain't never been proved. You mean to say he oughtn't to be in the gang? Sleepy scowled. Yeah, that's what I mean, the gangster said, imagining his ground more sure than it was. Lucius, too, was surprised by the chief's resultant fury. Think I don't know how to run this outfit, who to pick for it, the leader shouted. Mean to say I don't know my men. I never said that, boss, Milt hastened. You just shut your head, yelled Sleepy. I'm running this outfit. Outlaw Milt was more near to drawing a bullet than was the shooting fool. I admits the Del Rio kid fell down on the garden job. Sleepy broke the silence. But that ain't no sign him and his guns can't stay in the gang. You can go back to watching, Milt, and you better be careful to watch good, 'cause I am beginning not to like. Yeah, anyways. Dead silence, charged with venomous hatred and near murder, followed. The Lucius's heart thumped. Getting pulled off, the guard job might be almost as bad as staying on it. He saw visions of himself being sent out to work cattle. He would be shown up in 10 minutes there, even in less time than that, for he could not rope his own horse. I got a special job for you, the chief announced. Milt, you run down and catch the kid up a hoss while I am telling him what I wants him to do. Grinning, although he did not calculate his revenge complete, the gangster started away to do the roping. You're pretty sure nobody much in this country knows you, ain't ya? Sleepy asked Lucius. Yes, the youth replied. I got a little spine to be did. The rustler lowered his voice confidentially. There is a bunch of guys 10 miles south o' here. What used to be in my gang starting enter business for themselves. Sleepy paused and stared speculatively at the deputy. Long as you keeps your hat on so's your yaller hair. Don't show nobody. We'll know you as the Del Rio kid, the outlaw went on. I couldn't send none of my old men down to find out what I wants to know. What? Lucius asked. I want you to find out where the other outfits got their cattle hid. They've been running off a lot of critters the last few weeks. There ain't room here for two big wrestling outfits. Less than one is working for the other. I aims to get them cattle what the other gang has stole. Stole them? The young man smiled. Exactly, responded the chief, but you got to get in that gang and learn things. Lucius drew one of his revolvers and examined it idly. Don't use none of them things on this job, Sleepy warned. This ain't to be no shootin' bee, you just to get in and get out with the information I need. Milt came back, leading the shootin' fool's saddled horse. Receiving a few parting instructions from Sleepy, the youth mounted and rode away. 4. 2 wrestling gangs instead of 1, and both outside my county. 2 chances to do some good shooting, and I am told to keep my irons cooled. Lucius jogged along in a quandary. Where was he getting? He had been unable to find out much, and all the time he had been at Sleepy's stuck at the adobe house on guard, he had not been able to learn where the gang was putting stolen stock, which was the important thing he had been sent to learn. Being sent to join the second crew, thieves, added to his problem. Diplomacy, diplomacy. His mind went back to Alcorn's warning. How am I going to use diplomacy, I'd like to know, when the chief thing that's needed here is lead? If this was in our county, we would wipe out both gangs in a hurry, but this Sheriff Johnson over here must be scared, he grinned pridefully. At that, he said, I guess it's just like, Sheriff Alcorn said. Johnson hasn't any deputies like I am. The shooting fool assuredly did not lack egotism, but he did not let it interfere with sane thought during the few miles remaining to his destination, the camp of the second rustling gang. Armed with explicit directions from Sleepy, he had no trouble locating it. By the time he arrived, he had a sketchy sort of plan evolved. If this new gang already knows where Sleepy caches his herds, it'll work all right, he asserted hopefully. Riding up to the ranch house, he was halted by a guard, as he had expected to be. Kever's the boss? He demanded. Who you mean? The watcher asked warily. The success of Lucius' plan, he had decided, lay in direct tactics. The big chief, he replied confidentially. The guy that runs this rustling gang. It was a dangerous business, riding up and calling a man a rustler. But the very surprise of it saved the youth from a bullet. The guard was too stunned. Who are you? That worthy questioned. For answer, the shooting fool swept off his hat. Did you ever hear of the Del Rio kid? He asked, hoping the name Sleepy had given him would mean something. Here it did. Sure, the guard replied. Is you him? Run, call the boss, Lucius ordered authoritatively. He's down at the stable, the gangster said deferentially. I'll go with you down to meet him if you wants me to. The chief was a typical cowboy gone wrong. Medium-sized, hard-faced, he stared coldly at the approaching pair. One hand hooked in his cartridge belt gave hint that he was a man of action. This here is the Del Rio kid, the guard exclaimed. I wish I knew the kid, Lucius thought. His name works like a charm with this bunch of tough gun, slinging hombres. The leader studied the shooting fool for a moment, and the latter indifferently took off his hat. Sure glad to see you, the outlaw responded instantly. My name's Ben Setman. I heard you described 100 times. I'd know you by your hair anywhere. Lucius sighed with relief and just stood there grinning. What you aimin' ter do down in these parts? Setman asked. I am just looking things over, the deputy said. By the way, I saw a friend of yours this morning. Who's that? Demanded the rustler. Fellow by the name of Smith, Sleepy Smith. Lucius watched the other carefully. The reaction was what he hoped for. That stinging lizard, that no-count horsefly, what calls himself a rustler, that— Setman paused for lack of words. Seething with indignation, he asked, What you know about Sleepy? Not much. The shooting fool replied with a smile, I only paid a short call this morning. Sleepy offered to give me a job, said. He had a big bunch of cattle staked out that I could cut in on. Yeah, I know them cattle and where he got 'em, the rustler cried bitterly. There ain't room in this part of the country for both Sleepy and me, every one of them critters. He has got means just another one that he stole off me. You ain't going to join a skunk like Sleepy as your kid. Why don't you throw in with a live outfit like mine? Sleepy's got a lot of cattle. Lucius nodded as if weighing both propositions. So if I got cattle, and I'll get plenty more, Setman retorted. I'll give you the right kind of a cut. I need a gunman with the kind of reputation you've got. Neither one of you has enough cattle to hire a man with the reputation I've got, the youth said. Why don't you bring the two herds together? Then you could talk turkey, maybe, to a fellow who's as good as I am. I don't mean join with him. I mean swipe his herd, Lucius offered. Join with Sleepy, not on your life. The rustler shook his head. The idea filtered slowly through Setman's mind. Finally, he grasped it in all its possibilities. By gosh, kid, he thumped the deputy on the back. I am sure glad you come to me. I never thought of doing that. Go healed and wipe Sleepy off the map at the same time you steal the cattle, Lucius added to his plan. Do you know where he's hidden the animals? Sure, until the brands heal, he close herds them in a sink about 3 miles straight north of his ranch buildings. After the brands are okay. The critters run wild through the brush just like any other cattle. Can I see your cattle? The shooting fool asked. And say, how about going after Sleepy's herd pretty quick? Course you can see what cattle I got, Sedman replied. If it's okay with you, we'll do that little job over to Sleepy's tomorrow night. Having obtained the information about where the freshly branded cattle of both gangs were kept, the deputy's work was really done. But he wanted to go further and see justice accomplished in the extermination of the outfits. Therefore, the next morning he said to Sethman, I'll sort of mosey along and do some scouting around Sleepy's place. When you fellows come up tonight, I'll be there to cover the house from the back. I wouldn't let any of Sleepy's men get away if I were you. I'll be counting on your guns to help out, kid, the rustler replied. Don't you get lost. I won't, the deputy promised, and departed. At Sleepy's, he almost got a shot from Milt before the chief appeared. Come back in a hurry, Sleepy snarled. Why don't you stay down there till you learn something? I learned plenty, Lucius cried. I came back to warn you. Setman has the same idea you have. He's coming up tonight to steal your herd. He's what? The outlaw exclaimed in astonishment. Then, without waiting for an answer, I hope he tries it, just let him try it. There won't be one o' his gang left to tell the tale. You ride out and round up all our fellers. We'll teach Setman something. I'd better go out and sort of scout along the trail, the shooting fool suggested. I'll watch for them. Keep your eyes peeled, ordered Sleepy. They won't try nothing for night. We got all day to get set for 'em. But you just sit out there, and if you hears anything, fan the breeze. So long, Milt bawled out, tearing away on a fast horse. Goodbye, the shooting fool called. Get down there and start watching, the chief commanded. The deputy concealed his horse in a coulee and dozed throughout the day. After the stars popped out, he began to worry. It seemed to him hours that he sat there after nightfall without hearing a sound. I wonder if the whole stunt's going to fall through, he whispered. It's getting pretty late, I guess. Maybe Sedman got cold feet. If I thought these birds were going to get away, I'd very nearly go straight against Alcorn's orders and do some shooting myself. He drew his revolvers from their holsters and aimed them at imaginary enemies in the dark. A shot rang out. Lucius hugged his cold guns and listened. Another shot and another and another. Soon the whole thicket for miles around was roaring. At least a score of guns were in action in the direction of Sleepy's headquarters. As thief battled thief, the shooting fool climbed aboard his horse and turned its head toward town. For half a mile, the animal plodded along sleepily, then suddenly it broke into a gallop, goaded by the crazy actions of the young man on its back. The shooting still sounded behind. Whoopee! Lucius let out yell after yell. I bet Alcorn will call that a case of Dawg Eat Dawg, and he won't be far wrong at that. Bang, bang, bang. The shooting fool emptied both revolvers at the rising moon. Thank you so much for hanging out today. My name is Saul, and this is the Pulp Archive. Now, if you had fun, I'd appreciate it if you could like, subscribe, comment, and share. That stuff really helps. And like most stories we cover here, today's was recommended by you. So if there's a story you'd like to see, send us an email at pulparchivelibrary@gmail.com. We'd love to cover it. If you'd like to support the podcast and keep us going, consider becoming a member on Patreon. Just visit patreon.com/pulparchive. For a few bucks a month, you'll get access to all our podcasts, narration of complete issues, and private explicit episodes that wouldn't be allowed publicly. We feature almost every genre of pulp fiction, horror, detective, western, and even sports. Special thanks to our patrons who make the podcast possible and make every episode of the Pulp Archive happen. Every episode is dedicated to our Patreon members. I truly could not do this without you.